Coming up in this tutorial, I discuss how you can create a simple text effect using Element 3D. This is the final result. Enjoy! Hey, Nathan here in PH Studios, and welcome back to another After Effects tutorial. And in this tutorial, I want to discuss the Element 3D plugin provided by Video Copilot, and how to use that to create some really nice introductions and text effects and stuff like that. Okay, so I'm going to start a brand new composition, and I'm going to use 960 by 540. You can use any size you want. I'm just going to do this for recording purposes. And then any length, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to show you what you can do with Element 3D. Okay, so Element 3D is a plugin provided by Video Copilot. It is $150, and it is a 3D object-based particle engine. And we can use, masks and text layers and create some really nice, cool introduction titles and cool effects as well. And you can also buy packs for models that you can use in your projects. But for this video, I'm just going to discuss masking and text and how to make those three-dimensional. And then you can watch some tutorials from him if you want more information and promotional videos, and you can view the project tour and stuff like that. I will be using the one of his plugins as well. It is the Pro Shaders. I'm going to use that to shade the text as well, so you can get a sneak peek of that. Okay, so we have a new composition, 960 by 540. You can make it 720 or 1080 or any size you want to. And then what I'm going to do is, for now, I'm going to start a text layer, and I'm going to type in text here. And then I'm going to center that, so I'm going to bring in the title and action safe, and I'm going to center that. I don't want it, I'm not going to be perfect about it, so I'm just going to visually center it, see how it'll look. And then I'm going to take off the title action safe. Okay, so this is a standard 2D layer. Even if we make it 3D layer, it is still a 2D text. So if we take the camera tool and orbit, it will still be a, let's go to the custom view. It is still a 2D text. So as I orbit, it is not three-dimensional. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and let's make a new solid layer. And any color, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to choose dark blue here. And I'm just going to call this Element 3D. And make sure it's the comp size. And then I'm going to go to Effect, Video Copilot, and then Element. And then once that's loaded, I'm going to choose Custom Layers here. It's going to be a custom text and mask layer. And I'm going to choose the text here layer. Now I'm going to hide the text here text layer. I'm going to leave Element 3D visible, but not the actual text layer. Then I'm going to go to the scene setup. And as you see, nothing, no model, nothing is shown in the preview. When we are dealing with masks and text, and we want to make that 3D, we just click this extrude here. Now it's a 3D layer, or 3D model, I should say. And then let's increase the bevel copy to about 2 here. I want 2 different bevels, so I can use my mouse scroll wheel to zoom in close or go far away, get a nice look at what it looks like, and then I can zoom in close and do some edits here. So for number 2, I want to increase the bevel size. And then I want to increase the Z offset. And I want to make sure that the bevel size is smaller than bevel 1. And I do not want the X and the T to touch. As you see, I'm manipulating bevel 1. If I increase the size in bevel 1, letters start to touch. So I want to make sure that they are not touching. So I'm going to decrease bevel 1 by quite a bit. And then I want to decrease 2 as well. I want to do that just enough to where we get a nice effect that looks something like that. So bevel 2 is the one pushing out, and bevel 1 is the one that's wrapping around the letters. Okay, so once that's done, let's go ahead and apply a texture or a shader to these bevels. And I'm going to use the Pro Shaders plugin. And let's choose for the bevel 2, the one that's pushing out. Let's choose something like a blur orb for bevel number 2. Then for 1, I want to choose a dark metallic type of look. Black metal. That looks pretty nice. Now for the blur orb, I'm going to decrease the bevel size. Decrease the Z offset. I don't want it pushed that much. Alright, and then we can manipulate if things are too shiny, we can manipulate some settings here. Like the black metal, that it's quite a bit of shine right here. So I can decrease the shininess and specularity. I can just manipulate the settings until everything looks nice. Alright, everything looks good, so if we click OK, now we should see our text. And it is using Element 3D. So now let's go ahead and add a new camera. And I'm going to choose 35mm, just like the last tutorial. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Element 3D. If we go back to the scene setup, if you look at this number 1 here, that's marked in cyan, that means it is in group 1. So if we bring down this group 1 drop down, we can change the replicator, particle look, and let's go ahead and change the particle look here. We can change the size, change the randomness, and all that stuff. But what we are focusing on is we want each letter to be a separate object. They provide a multi-object drop-down. So if we click this drop-down, we will enable multi-objects. And then we get a whole list of new options. So if I increase the size, it'll increase the size of each individual object now. So I don't want it so close. I want it to be right about there. That looks kind of nice. Now, what I want to do is at 1 second, or let's say 1.5. Okay, so at 1.5 seconds, I want this to be the final result. And then I want the camera to kind of be at the bottom of a letter, and then each letter will fly through the camera and go to its position. So I'm going to manipulate the rotation here. I might manipulate X, Y, and Z, or I might just manipulate one of those. I'm just going to do that just in case. And then I'm going to modify the displacement X, Y, Z, and then the scatter X, Y, Z. Okay, so at the very beginning of the video, I want to manipulate the, let's see what the X, oh, wrong one. I want to manipulate the X to about 90 degrees. I do not want to manipulate the Y and then the Z. Let's go ahead and manipulate the Z. Okay. Displacement. X, this will displace the various objects in a specific direction. So in this case, I'm displacing them in the X direction. And then the Y. And then the Z. I'm going to increase the scatter amount, and then I'm going to increase the scatter amount for each individual XYZ. Now I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm really going to push in the Z. I'm actually going to do it the other way, because I want a letter to be right up against the camera. Okay. So let's go to the end, and let's press the letter N. And I'm going to go a little bit past the keyframes here. I'm going to scroll up, and I'm going to press the letter U. And I'm going to expose all keyframes, because I'm going to select all. And I'm going to choose Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. Okay, so I have this little segment of the composition selected. I'm going to do a RAM preview to see what that'll look like. Doesn't look that bad. Okay, the camera. The camera position, I'm going to keyframe at the end of the animation. And at the beginning of the animation, I want to move it to be below this letter. And I'm going to push it forward so it's right below it. And if you need to switch to a custom view, just so we can verify it. That looks good enough for now. So that is the active camera. So as this is animating, the camera is also animating. I want the camera to be Easy Ease as well. Okay. Now, I want to enable camera options, and I want to enable depth of field. And I want it to be a very close focus distance, because I want the letter T to be in focus. And let's increase the aperture a little bit. And let's see how that looks. just play around with the distance until it looks kind of nice. As you see, there's some little effects here. So I might adjust the blur level, might bring that down just a little bit and get rid of all the little artifact in here. Alright, so I played around with the settings a little bit. I just decreased the aperture amount. The background is not as blurred as I'd like it to be. Just play around with the settings. You don't want to make the T here a lot of artifacting going on here. You don't want that to happen. So just play around with the settings until you get a nice feel for what you want. Okay. Like I mentioned in the last tutorial, the depth of field is based on your focus distance. Whatever is within that distance will be clear. Everything else will be blurred out. As you see, all these letters are blurred out. So when this changes, we want to change the focus distance. So I want to keep that T in focus at all times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a keyframe this focus distance. And you can do it frame by frame. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it a linear transition. So I'm going to go forward a few frames, not frame by frame, just a few frames, and I'm going to increase the focus distance. So that T is still in focus. And then I'm going to go forward a few more frames, and then I'm going to adjust the focus distance again. Alright, go forward a few more frames. Then I'm going to go to the very end of the animation, and I'm going to adjust the focus distance one last time. Alright, so things look good. Let's go ahead and do a RAM preview. Take a look at it. So it's a subtle effect. Okay, I do not like the camera sitting still. So again, what I'm going to do in this tutorial as well, I'm going to adjust the orientation. I'm going to Alt left click the keyframe. Now I'm going to do wiggle 1 times a second, adjust the degrees by 5. Now that might be too much, but we'll see what it looks like at the end. Yeah. So I'm going to change the number 5 to, let's say, 2. How about number 1? So most of the stuff you do in Adobe After Effects is going to be manipulate this setting to be 1% less than what it was, and then you'll get a nice effect. So that looks pretty nice. Okay. Now everything is clear at this point. I don't want it to be so clear. I want it to be a nice motion blur. So what we can do with Element 3D is we can enable this motion blur option and enable motion blur for the composition. So as you see, as I toggle this on and off, you'll see it looks differently. That's because it's now being motion blurred out. So we get the blur from the camera because of the focus, the point of interest, and then we also get a nice motion blur. And then if we go into Element 3D, we do have a render setting options here, and we do have a motion blur option here. Motion blur is based on the comp settings. We can increase the samples if we want to make it much more of a blur. So 144, that's what it looks like. 6, that's what we had it before. If we do 1, you know, things look differently. So 6 seems to be pretty nice. Depth of field, we have manipulations here as well. We can manipulate whatever we want to here. So as you see here, we are currently at the letter T, and if we want to manipulate some things here, we can do it at the Element 3D level and not the camera level. So playing around with each settings might be a little bit of a hassle, but you know, depth of field, we did some of the stuff in the camera. Depth of field, we're doing some of the stuff in Element 3D. And that way we blurred all this out even more. And that looks like what we want it to look like. So let's do a RAM preview. And let's see what this looks like. Now the good thing about this is if you change the text layer to Hello World, look at what happened to Element 3D. However, since we wanted that, we have depth of field set up, so if you do change the text, you will need to change the depth of field. Because we had it set up to go right below the letter T, and now we change it to Hello World, it has been changed to where we did not get a nice result. So you can unhide this layer, change the text to whatever you want, and then Element 3D will automatically pick up that change. Okay, Element 3D. I'm going to press the letter U. Camera, I'm going to press the letter U. So that exposes all keyframes. I'm going to bring this up, and I'm going to select all keyframes. I'm going to move it a little bit later down in the composition. Now I'm going to bring this down, and let's see what happens. So it'll stay there for a little bit longer than the immediate change. The camera's expression wiggle should make it a nice effect, and then it will do what we always had it do before, which is, you know, bring the text in, the camera is staying still, the text is flying past the camera, the letters are starting to come together, and now this is the end result. Alright, maybe a little bit later. And I'm going to set the end portion here. Alright, so that wiggle command is a little bit too much for what we want it to be, especially at the end. So I'm going to change it, instead of 1, 1, I'm going to change it to 0.5, 1. That means that 0.5 times a second, it'll adjust the degrees by 1. So it should make a nice slow effect. Alright. Everything looks good now, so let's go ahead and in the Element 3D, let's add an effect. Let's go ahead and add a glow, and let's see what happens there. So the glow looks nice here. I'd like to animate the glow in and then out. So as it's transitioning, I do not like the glow here. At the very beginning, I do not like the glow here. It's way too strong, and it just doesn't fit nice. But right here, you know, it might look kind of cool to have it fade in at this point and then fade out. So let's set the glow's intensity to 0. And then let's press the letter U. And then let's set a keyframe for the intensity. Okay, so here is the intensity's keyframe. I'm going to move it back just a little bit, just a few frames, and then I'm going to set the keyframe, or the glow's intensity keyframe here to 1. Alright, then I'm going to go forward a little bit, and when it's done, there's a little option here that I can add a keyframe that's the exact same options as they are now. So when I click that, it adds a keyframe that has a 1 as the intensity. And then I want to fade it out kind of quickly to 0 again. I'm going to select all 4 of those keyframes, and I'm going to choose Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. So it might be a little bit slow. I want it to be a little bit faster of an effect. So I'm going to bring in we have 2 sets of 2. I'm going to bring those in closer to each other. And I'm going to see what that looks like. And maybe I'm going to bring them in just a little bit closer, but I'm going to extend the far left one. I'm going to extend that more, and then the far right one, I'm going to extend that more. I'm going to extend the far left one. There's 4 total keyframes. I'm going to select the last 3, and I'm going to move those until the middle point between 2 and 3 is kind of where the animation ends. And I'm going to see what that looks like. So all these little things are what happen when you create special effects. You know, adjust this keyframe 1 extra frame, maybe 2 or 3 frames, and let's see what that looks like. And I think that looks pretty nice. All right. So now that that is done, let's add a nice background. So let's go to Layer, New, Solid. And I'm going to make sure it's the comp size. I'm going to leave it the default, this color, kind of dark royal blue, as it's listed here. And I'm going to call this, I'm going to name it BG for background. I'm going to put it at the very bottom of all the layers. So instead of it being black, it's nice of a bluish look. So if we look at the scene from here and, you know, it kind of fits more. Okay, so now we have a nice look here. And if you want to adjust some things, we can go to Layer, New, Adjustment Layer, and we can manipulate a whole lot of his stuff, like effect, color correction, curves. We can change the color of it. We can make it more of a contrast. We can only show the blue areas, the light areas, if we want to do it that way. So that's just a quick change on the curves. It's only look at the curve here. It's only showing the really bright ones, and it's not going to show the darker areas. So I do not want to do that. I was just doing that as a demonstration. What I do want is just to make a little bit of a curve. And maybe bring down the greens and the reds. Just a little bit. So it's more of a bluish. And let's add a little bit more green to there. Now if that's too much color, you can always apply a effect, color correction, and then let's tint it. And that will change it to a grayscale, and then we can adjust the amount to tint. So if you like that color scheme but want to tone it down a little bit, you can adjust the tint. Now there's all sorts of stuff you can do. I'm not going to go into everything here, but I think that pretty much demonstrates what I wanted to discuss, which is the Element 3D. Okay, so Element 3D is a nice way inside After Effects to create a 3D text layer that you can manipulate each letter and transition from a nice scattered effect to a nice final result text here. And you can also use shape layers and use that in the Element 3D as well. So if you're looking for a way of easily getting 3D text, you don't want to go into a 3D modeling program, you should be able to get this plugin and everything will be just how you want it. You can manipulate them, create several different bevels. One is a outer one for this example. The next one is an inner one. Black is the outer, and a kind of a icy bluish look for the outer one. And then you manipulate some options here and however you want it to look like. And when you manipulate it and then save changes, they will automatically be changed in your scene. So if you didn't want so much black, you could go back to the scene setup and adjust the black metal and change that to a low extrusion, and then also change the blur orb to low extrusion. So if you didn't want that thick of letters, you could just manipulate that. However, the camera's positioning will not be right now, so you have to keep that in mind. So let's just let this render and we'll see what it looks like. So the letters are not as thick. And then right here, it barely looks like it's a 3D layer. The R gives it away. Everything else, you can't really tell if it's a 3D text layer. So if I bring up the extrude again, I think it was 1 and then 1, then everything should be fine. The camera's positioning is still correct. Okay, so I hope you learned something from this tutorial. Check out the video Copilot Element 3D plugin. There's a lot of cool things you can do with it, even from the models they give you. If you want to use a dedicated 3D model, you can also bring in models from other programs as well and use those. You can also use the replicator, which I didn't discuss. I'm using the atom particle. You can also use a replicator, and it'll duplicate your model in a way that kind of fits your needs. So if you have a 3D model of a car, you can add that to a replicator and replicate that model. He has some examples of those on his website. He does it with a headphones. He adds that to a replicator and he replicates that. But I just wanted to do a brief overview on this, and this, along with using the masks that I mentioned, that is what I did for my introduction video. I used my logo, and then I masked the logo, which I will discuss in a later tutorial. And then I did some stuff with text, like you see here, and manipulated some of it. It didn't go as crazy as this. But then at the end of the animation, I rotated everything, and then you saw it at the beginning of this video. So I used Element 3D on Element 3D to do that. I had text I wanted to write, my website, PH Studios, and then I had my logo, which is just the little bird above the text, and then those are all 2D images made in Photoshop. I brought them in After Effects, and Element 3D did the rest. So I think this is a pretty nice effect. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.